Welcome to Thrive, the podcast. Welcome to Thrive, the podcast, where I'll be talking with guests who've created extraordinary results in business and life through listening to and following through on their intuition in the face of logic, reason, and rationale, to demonstrate why your inner navigation is the most important advisor you'll ever meet. No matter what you've been through, faced, feared, or run from, Thrive is here to uplift you and give you the courage and fortitude to face your future, even when you don't feel fearless. I'm your host, Elizabeth Adams. Throughout my 20s and some of my 30s, I operated from a place of workaholism, believing that when I reached success, all would be well in my world. Coming home to myself was a journey that began with a series of synchronicities that led me to learning how to tap my intuition and ultimately gave me the tools to live a far more rewarding life. Since then, I've been helping my clients to thrive. No matter what you're up against, grief, depression, unfavorable circumstances of any kind are only ever a starting point on the way to realizing the life you were born to live. The power really is within you, and my intention with this podcast is to enable you to unlock it. In this episode, Meehir Patel, my guest, shares his experience of growing up being dominated by women, suppressing his masculine leadership, the turmoil of abusive sexual intimacy, after going through a mental health crisis, shame, alcoholism, anxiety, depression, and religious conditioning, to being ready to call it a day on life, and how this moment led him to finding his intuition, resiliency, and ultimately choosing to thrive in life. Meehir, welcome to Thrive, the podcast.
Thank you.
I've known you for a little while, but not really well. We met a number of years ago now. And what I love about you and what I loved about you then was just your presence. You have a beautiful and very magnificent energy. And so I'm thrilled to have you here. And also I just wanted to share with listeners on this podcast a little about what you've learned and what you've created through using your intuition. You know, where were you at in life before embracing intuition as a way of intentionally creating, and what has the choice of using your intuition to intentionally create resulted in for you?
I will do my best to be as open and vulnerable as possible. Yeah, it's been quite the journey. Is following your inner guidance, following your intuition hasn't been the easiest journeys for me, but it's been the one that's been the most worth it, because I kind of realized, I had to come back to myself. It's always been a journey about coming back to yourself more than anything. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation. And I know we talked a little bit the other day, kind of candidly when we caught up, but I'm happy to kind of, go through things again and just, speak from the perspective of intuition, inner guidance, being self-referential, being sovereign. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
So recently you ran a workshop, I believe it was a 3-day workshop with your team on sexual self-mastery. It's an unusual topic, but I loved it. Like when I saw that you were putting that out, I listened into the short call that you'd all had. I think you did a 1-hour call, and it was electrifying.
So glad to hear that.
Yeah, I loved hearing everyone's experience and just the way the conversation opened up to allow us, the listeners, to ask those questions of ourselves and our own experience. So, you know, what is sexual self-mastery? How did that come about?
It's a great question. So it's kind of interesting because it was actually a weekend thing. So it was a 2-day workshop, and then that we did the being the pace car sexual self-mastery the previous week. That's the one that you were able to kind of just clock in on. And yeah, it's been quite the journey to kind of get to a place, because I work with a gentleman named Mark DeFrancio. He's my coach, mentor, business partner, and he founded creative self-mastery. And I've kind of joined him on that journey of establishing it and fleshing out the teachings and actually teaching the stuff. I'm kind of one of his first students, first apprentices. And yeah, we've kind of like, in our own personal sort of my private relationship with him as a client, and him being my coach, I've discussed every aspect of my life with him. And it's kind of been interesting because he's made it very, very comfortable, talking to him about it. Like I've never felt like threatened by telling him the things that I'm sharing about my deepest, darkest secrets, where my mind has been, some of the stuff that I've done. And, yeah, he's made it very comfortable for me and he's, it's unusual, but I think it just makes so much sense because he's a gay man, and he's a married gay man. And, if you asked me like 10 years ago, would I have this type of relationship with a man who's, homosexual, but he's like very masculine. He's not a typical sort of stereotypical sort of gay person that I was used to knowing. That was someone that was quite effeminate and not really masculine at all, to be honest. But Mark, actually, quite frankly, is one of the most masculine men I've ever met. And it was that sort of masculine leadership that was quite powerful, but felt very safe for me to actually discuss things about my sexuality, as well as every other aspect of my life. And it's been kind of interesting journey for just, me and him and I, but also our team that we've been building. We kind of go, I implore anyone, if they ever have the opportunity to work with Mark, they actually explore that conversation with him, or any of us coaches. He's kind of trained us to be very comfortable having any type of conversation, no matter how sensitive it might be. If someone has a bit of a traumatic relationship with the topic, say like sex can be, we're quite equipped to handle it. So, but like for me, it's been kind of interesting because in the last sort of couple of years, one of the biggest challenges that I've had, and, Mark is quite happy pointing it out to me, that, in the conversations I've had is, and even through my own experiences, is that my relationship to women, the feminine, it's been a challenging one. Not that I hate them or anything like that. It's kind of like I swing back and forth because I'm in a pendulum swing between, feeling amazing with them, depending, who they are. And then the next minute, I'm having an experience where I'm, despised by them. And it was very sort of confronting to realize that, I was creating that entire experience. And it went all the way, from a relationship level right down to an intimacy sort of sexual level. And it's been we've been having these conversations, him and I, and then the team, and then Mark made it very sort of obvious that we need to make this into an actual workshop. And he's like, I'm going to do it, whether you're coming or not, I'm going to do it. But I couldn't say no, because I felt the power in it. And I felt, I've done a lot to kind of make myself whole around the feminine, and my relationship with women, I know it's kind of like my cross to bear. Like, I know I'm always going to have my challenges around it, but I'm choosing not to give in to, like, you know, the thoughts and feelings, the egoic sort of narratives that I have around, you know, having a bit of an adversarial dynamic. It's, you know, me against them or them against me, or they're threatening any shape or form, because that's kind of where my wounding was, where I was raised by a very dominant grandmother, and my mom wasn't able to, because my grandma even dominated her, so she didn't allow her to raise me either. So I had a very possessive and dominant grandmother, and that's the type of woman I found myself dating. Weirdly enough, most people would say, how is a quite masculine man who doesn't seem that submissive end up in relationships with quite dominant women? But I found out over the years, you know, through the work, you know, through my conversations with Mark, that you know, when I feel extremely vulnerable emotionally, and I don't feel very powerful, it's my path of least resistance is to seek out quite a domineering female, a woman who's in herself quite established, has the resources, because I don't feel very safe. I feel very vulnerable doing that. And that's kind of how the setup was when I was growing up. So that's kind of how I would enter those relationships, but not, you know, not, it's all unconscious at the time, but not realizing that I was making certain agreements unconsciously around how they were supposed to treat me and how I was supposed to treat them. There was a bit of people pleasing on my part. There was a bit of a, you know, strong codependency, as well as sort of dominant, submissive sort of dynamic, but a strong codependent dynamic. And also, you know, if you're you know, if you're in a relationship with anyone that's quite possessive, um, your truth, your own purpose kind of gets gagged, it kind of gets denied, but it's by design. You know, I don't want to blame the other person for that, or the woman for that. It's just, it's my own dysfunction kind of just, you know, playing itself out. It becomes the perfect excuse for me to not step into my power. And that's
Yes.
kind of been,
It's almost like the invitation. It's the invitation of leaning into that, right?
yeah,
And we don't see
absolutely.
that when we're in the thick of it, that it's an invitation for our growth and development.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I was invited a couple of times through various partnerships with women, and it was the last one that kind of, it was either I was gonna get it then or not. I was doomed to kind of repeat the experience again. So, you know, the relationship started off well, and then lockdown hit. We were living together, and then the relationship turned quite destructive. It turned quite abusive. I didn't even know that what was happening. You know, it was emotional abuse, verbal abuse, and it got a little bit physical on her part. And it was, I didn't realize what was happening. I was speaking to Mark about it, and he says, "Yeah, she's an abusive person," and I was like, "Okay, cool. That's who she is." But then, it kept kind of happening, and it only kept happening because I wasn't in my power around it, and I wasn't, establishing strong agreements, nor was I upholding them,
Mm.
and because for my need for safety, because I had compromised my integrity completely, because my need for safety was bigger than my need to establish boundaries and be powerful and lead and all that kind of stuff.
Mm.
So, but it was one conversation we had a couple of dysfunctional episodes with my then ex-partner, and then I was in a coaching session with Mark, and he said, clearly it wasn't registering for me, but he says, "Dude, you're a victim of abuse," and I was like, huh? I was like, I'm a victim of abuse, and that's kind of when it was a bit of a house of cards when I realized, holy shit, like this is what I'm inviting in, and it was very evident that I was either gonna learn my lesson now. Otherwise, if I didn't, the next time there could be a lot more at stake. Luckily, we were in a rented accommodation. We didn't have shared resources like a mortgage. We didn't have any children or anything like that. But next time, if I wasn't going to learn what I need to learn, that sort of stuff could have been involved, and it would have been a lot more messier. And it would have just reinforced the story around how powerless I am around, my relationships with women, and just powerless in general in terms of my overall agency in life.
Sounds like a really beautiful clearing for you to now see all of that so that you can intentionally create the life, the lover, the family, the leadership that's going to really, what would be the word? Will fulfill you, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. It was it was interesting because you asked about the sexual self-mastery workshop. How did we get there? And I think it's always been on the cards. It's just that creative self-mastery as a company, as a team was I think it's coming to a place which is just, the structures are amazing, they're strong, the leadership is powerful from my standpoint, from Mark's standpoint, from my other colleagues, Stanley's, and then we got four amazing, powerful women leaders on the team as well, all kind of versed in the work. And we were like, okay, we're gonna do this workshop. Nothing's different from what we usually do. We're just applying the premises to this aspect of our life that happens to be our sex life, which we've done in private. We're just gonna do a workshop around it. But what was really powerful, and the weekend that we did, because we didn't have a lot of attendees, and we didn't really care much because we wanted to have this as an evergreen type of experience. So we have a self-paced version that we can share with people in preparation for a live immersive experience that we're doing in London in the spring of 2024. But it was, we became facilitators and participants in the actual workshop. Mark kind of just didn't tell us that, but it was kind of a bit of an unexpectedness. But it worked out beautifully. And I made a very conscious choice going in. It was very obvious to me that most aspects of my life, they were out on the table. Like if you needed the roadmap to destroy me in terms of my dysfunction, my history, most people had it. Like, and it felt, it can be scary when you're not that forthcoming. And look, certain things are meant to stay private. It's not, I'm not asking anyone to kind of blare everything out. You got to be very much in your power to share what's true for you to share. But everything was, my cards were pretty much laid out with, especially with Mark and the team, they pretty much knew everything about me, which is amazing in itself. But my sex life was the one area where I had a lot of, strong values and narratives, and I would say a little bit of shame as well. Being a man, I'm not, I haven't had, crazy amount of sexual partners. Every sexual partner I've had has actually been a girlfriend who I've been in a monogamous, committed, long-term relationship with. All of this stuff, and and that's I've had 3 sexual partners in my entire life, and I'm assuming, I was making assumptions where I have to present a certain way, and people have this idea of me, but I kind of realized that didn't serve me at all, and I kind of realized it's completely inauthentic, and there's a lot of weight to carry. It feels completely like misaligned with who I actually am. But Mark knew about it, and a few people in my life knew about it, but to kind of share it with the rest of the team fully, I took the workshop to actually have an opportunity to actually share fully about where I was at, where I've been, who I am now, what I'm working to create next in terms of my sex life. If I'm 38 now, I even told them on the call, because Mark just asked, randomly, he kind of like switched it up a little bit as a good leader does, to keep us on our toes. He asked everyone, when did everyone lose their virginity? And I was the last one out of the team. I lost my virginity literally, what, we're 2023 now, 10 years ago. Right. So I lost my virginity at 27. And I already made a decision that I was going to share at some point, but Mark asked the question. And it was, after that, I shared that, and that was like, nothing happened. I didn't feel like the team judged me or saw me any different or respected me less. All of this sort of bullshit that was in my head kind of was completely, blown out of the water. It was completely like just the creative tension actually resolved powerfully, rather than it creating more psychological tension for me. Actually, I felt very loved and held in that space, and I continue to feel that way over the course of the entire workshop. Then I went on to kind of identify, it was one of the last parts in the workshop. And, you know, one of the premises, also sort of the teaching, the premises that we were kind of identifying within sexual self-mastery is that there's an experience that we can have in the bedroom that can actually, you know, if it's a fantasy or a desire, we can construct it in a really powerful way. We can set the pace. We can be a leader there. It can be, we can act it out and experience it, so it can release us from a dysfunctional experience in everyday life. So if we take into account, you know, I was going for, you know, at my weakest emotionally, most vulnerable, I was going for very dominant, sort of possessive women, because that's what equated to safety. And then we did like an intuitive exercise right at the end where Mark asked, okay, what are we denying ourselves sexually? And as I tuned in, it was very clear to me, is like, as I identify as a, you know, typical masculine man, no problem with leadership, taking the lead, whatever, setting the pace for the most part. But from a sexual standpoint, a deep desire was to actually completely submit to the feminine, right? And I could actually recreate that experience if I wanted to, as a creative endeavor, within the bedroom. And I kind of, when I tuned in, the specifics I got was, I was like, you know, a dominatrix. So a dominatrix, yeah. And then, you know, she would be, obviously there was a little bit of physical pain. And then with that physical pain, after that, she soothes it. So she would maybe put cream on it or whatever like that. And it was super, like, I was getting super specific. So she soothes me, but then also the soothing goes even further, where you would be sucking on her breasts and being fed. So I took myself through the entire, and I shared it with everyone there. You know, I would have never even dreamed of sharing that stuff, as, you know, presenting the kind of image I think I'm presenting into the world. And I kind of just laid it out. And that for me was, I realized why we're doing this workshop, why we're doing sexual self-mastery, why we're doing an in-person thing. It was kind of like for me, it was the last bit of the puzzle, in terms of the level of vulnerability I was bringing to the table. But I also gained, from an energetic and a vibrational perspective, I also gained that submission with the women leaders in our team, right? Because they knew everything about me, and they didn't kind of, you know, judge me or feel, you know, try to emasculate me or, you know, energetically castrate me or any shape or form, because that's one of my biggest fears. You know, that's the thing I'm trying to avoid the most. But that didn't happen, and actually, you know, we became even closer as a team. So yeah, so I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, well, it definitely, you know, I guess what I get from that is anyone who's at that cusp, you know, because you can be very powerful and successful in the world. I think you even mentioned this, but in your home life, in your private life, there's an emptiness, or there's a driving force that, where you feel completely unfulfilled and disconnected. And this is a way of bringing into the space the wholeness of ourselves, right? It's a way of connecting to all aspects of ourselves, not just having a professional face or high achiever or dominant persona in the world and having nothing at home. So that's the one thing, but I'd like to go a little bit further back as to how you ended up here doing this type of work, because this was not what you started out doing in the world, is it? And there's a whole, you know, there's a whole hero's journey there, essentially, of your experience. I'd love for you to share that.
No, absolutely. What I would, so when we were catching up the other day, so I think the best bet is from the beginning, as they say. So if anyone's not familiar with the hero's journey, part of it is, you know, that maybe there's some greatness within you, and then you get the call, right? You get a call to answer and to live your greatness. Let's just say that I didn't pick up the phone a couple of times. Um, so in we're talking 10 years. I would say it spans the last 15 to 20 years, right? So I knew from a very early age that the conventional life didn't seem to sit right with me. Getting a job, getting a house, getting married. It just, I saw the value in it, but I just felt so disconnected from it for the most part of my life. Um, and I remember going through school and going through education, higher education, and then eventually work, that I was just like, something just doesn't, I couldn't put my finger on what it was. Like, why was I disconnected? Like, I'm going through the motions, but I can't seem to like just target, like, what is it? What am I here to do? And I guess that was the phone ringing all that time, but I didn't dare ask the questions because of the fear that I carried for most of my life. And it, in the extreme cases, the fear was so extreme, I got myself into situations where I was experiencing that fear, like I did with my previous relationships with ex-partners. But I remember, like, I got into university, I essentially failed, and then I had the opportunity to kind of retake stuff, but that wouldn't mean I got a degree. I'd get a diploma at best. And I kind of got, I got really annoyed. I was like, what's the point? So I dropped out of university. And then shortly after, I just entered full-time work. I was into computers and stuff. I still am, type of thing, but I never thought I'd make a career out of it. But it was an enthusiastic sort of area of my life. So I got an IT job at the time. And we're talking, so I quit uni in 2007. And then I entered sort of full-time work in 2008. And it was a really low paying job. It was really entry level. I mean, I don't know how anyone could live off the wage. It was like all you were getting paid was like 16K a year. And I had to supplement that work with working on the weekends at the supermarket. Plus, I had, I want to live a certain lifestyle. And I don't want to feel like I'm falling behind my friends, falling behind the conventions, all of that sort of stuff. So all of these things are happening. Obviously, I'm completely unconscious to it. And I remember, so I'd been working part-time, in Sainsbury's, to supplement the income to the full-time job. But I'd been working Sainsbury's prior to that for 7 years at that point. And then one thing that I was always doing, and I didn't realize how detrimental it was at the time, is that I was drinking. I was drinking quite a bit, and it was binge drinking essentially. And every time there was an opportunity to have a good time, I would make sure that I would have the best time with the copious amounts of alcohol. And I used to be like the ringleader for drinking. I was known as the party starter and all that. So I still kind of am, but I can do it without the booze. That I've come full circle there too. But it was, I create a very strong identity around being the guy who gets the party started, the guy who loved drinking, loved to get everyone else drunk. I turned into a person that I felt I couldn't be when I was sober. So that was kind of like most weekends throughout my sort of early to mid 20s. And then I'd been at my full-time job for about 2 years. And I'd been working, 60-hour weeks with no days off. And I got a little bit fed up. So at the time, I'd hurt my back. And I was signed off sick from the doctor from Sainsbury's, because I just wanted my weekends free. I didn't mind my full-time job. Like, it was an office job. I could just sit there and it's pretty relaxed. It wasn't really stressful. But I remember I wanted to have a little bit extra time off. So I decided to forge the doctor's note. And I submitted it, and I ended up getting caught. And I remember getting, the HR department. I went to work. The HR department called me in and they said, "Oh yeah, we need to talk about this." And obviously I denied the whole thing. And it was very obvious that I was probably going to get dismissed because it would mean it's essentially gross misconduct because you're forging stuff. It's fraudulent stuff. So getting caught, I didn't realize what would happen after. I was very unconscious to it, but I just decided to leave. It's like, nah, you're not going to fire me. I'm going to leave. Okay. So I left. Not realizing that I felt so ashamed because I had fucked up university, and then I fucked up the one job, even though it was Sainsbury's. I loved working there, and I'd worked there for 7 years. Like I dedicated myself to something 7 years, and this is how I ended it. But I didn't know that this was happening. Like I kind of took it for granted, and I was like, I didn't leave with a bang. I left through the back door, essentially, and it wasn't, that kind of compounded where I was at, and I'm pretty sure I just started drinking more, and I was just basically living for the weekend. And then I remember, I was able to kind of get a new job, and that kind of helped the income situation a little bit. But so that I was working outside of London at the time. This is about 2010, and then I was able to move into a city job, which is something I always wanted to do because all my friends were in like the city, working in the city. So I wanted to be around them, be able to drink with them on a Friday night, Thursday night, because that's the thing to do in the city. And that was like late 2010. Christmas was fine. Drank my way through Christmas, having a great time. New Year's came, and that was probably the beginning of the end. Because I had ignored what was deep within the pain that I was in. I didn't realize, and I was unraveling. I started to unravel a little bit. Literally the day, New Year's Day, I started getting crazy anxiety. And I wouldn't call it, I don't think I went into panic attack level, but I felt paranoid. I felt really sort of uneasy. I felt really unstable, and I couldn't orient myself. And I didn't realize at the time, but I was losing my grip on reality slowly but surely. I was losing orientation. I'm losing control. And the way I kind of resolved that psychological tension, let alone existential tension, was to drink even more. So my alcohol consumption went up, because the only time the anxiety was I was able to cut through the anxiety was actually, drink, because alcohol is a depressant. So it took the edge off, because I was feeling on edge all the time. And my mind was just going crazy. I felt I was losing my marbles for the most part. And because I was losing for orientation, and I had no relationship to inner guidance or my intuition, I'm looking outside of me for answers. Right? And I'm looking outside of me for answers in terms of, how do I get orientation? Am I thinking, I basically had a form of OCD, they would call it. It's called pure OCD, which is you have ruminations. And you just think about the thing that you thought. So you had an intrusive thought, and you're like, shit, how did I get to an intrusive thought? Everybody has them. But if you're in a compromised state of consciousness, you're going to take it very personally, and you're going to make it mean something about you. Right. And I started to make it mean that, I started having thoughts around my sexuality, around homosexuality, around sexual violence, all of these kind of things. And I was completely freaked out by what was going on in my head. And I was on edge all the time. And hence why drinking kind of helped me. Well, I say helped me, but it kind of took the edge off completely. But at the time, my self-loathing went through the roof. And in the extreme cases, the idea of just ending it all and killing myself and suicide was like prevalent throughout the entire sort of period I was in that.
Mm.
And that lasted about over a year. So we're talking at the beginning of 2011, all the way to like the crescendo was the April of 2012. So I started, you know, I started to get better towards the end of 2011. When I say better, I mean the anxiety started to, reduce, but the depression, when you have an extreme case of anxiety, so most people will know, they talk about manic depression. So you have mania where you're like full of energy and anxiousness. And then like when that kind of wears off, you get into a deep depression. So I was kind of have a little bit of that where I would hit like bouts of depression, but it's so, you don't realize you're in a depressive state.
Yeah.
And and I'm continuing to drink and all this kind of stuff, and alcohol's kind of just further exacerbating the depressive state because my alcohol is a depressant. And throughout that time, so one of my biggest sort of preoccupations is a fear of external forces, and hence why the relationship of being, I'm either swinging between wanting to be dominated or being fear of being dominated, right? By taken out essentially,
Yeah.
right? And it, with my parents, with religion, with God, with the devil, all of this kind of stuff. Even though I'm not a Christian, even that's in my narrative, in my psyche. There's a wrathful God. There's a hell. All of this kind of stuff it was all happening in my head. Every structure I had around reality, about life, around how things are, were crumbling. Like everything was crumbling, and I was like, I was trying to make sense of it all, because for every sort of, for someone kind of like, again, external forces. So one authority saying one thing and another perceived authority saying another, then you're like, okay, what's the truth here? So this is, and that was creating tremendous amount of inner conflict within me, because I didn't know how to look within, and I didn't even think it was an option. Right, to be self-referential, to have, I didn't even know that intuition wasn't even a fucking thing at that point.
Yeah.
Right. Completely like, we're almost, from the moment we're born, we're kind of domesticated into thinking that we don't have the power, and our own inner guidance is literally just some mystic hooey for the most part. So it got pretty, I was able to take care of most of the anxiety, and I was sharing with you last time that it became, the depression started to settle in, but I wasn't aware of it. And then I remember one afternoon I was having one of those episodes, feeling a little bit uncomfortable. So I'll go Google some question I would have around religion, and am I going to hell, and how do I, absolve my sins, and all this is how much I felt that I'd done something wrong just because I thought certain things, right? I hadn't even acted anything out, right? But I'm looking outside of me. It's like, okay, I need certainty that I'm not going to get fucked up in the afterlife, or like I'm walking down the street and something will fall out the sky and drop something on my head and I'm dead. That's literally the levels that where my mind would go. And then obviously I couldn't find the answer, because there's never, the way our psyche works is, it's, if you're in survival mode, it's looking ways to doubt reality. So my mind got very good at doubting everything. Essentially I'm a quite egoically, my ego is based around fear. So I'm a very fear-based type of person. And I got so frustrated with not finding the answers. I was like, what do I usually do when I get frustrated? I'm going to go for a drink. And then I remember it was like midweek in April, early April of 2012. And I was working in Soho at the time in London, and there's plenty of places to drink just at your doorstep there. And the person I used to work with then, he was quite a big drinker. He was always into drinking as well. I think he had a problem too, and he kind of revealed a little bit later, a few years down the line, that he had a problem. But I remember we went for a drink, and then like I was about 2 pints in, and I remember like just wanting to give up completely. I'd been fighting the urge to give up, to give in, basically to commit suicide. And I remember there was a voice. The voice was always there. Some days it was loud, some days it was low, sometimes it was I couldn't hear nothing. But the voice was always saying, just to end it all the time. But this time, whilst I was steaming drunk, it was just saying, okay, today's the day, right?
Wow.
And I'd been in this situation before whilst I was pissed out of my head, but I've been able to be like, nah, I ain't doing it. But this time I was like, yeah, I don't have it in me. I think today's the day. I was like, fucking hell. I was like, and I couldn't fight it. Like emotionally, I couldn't fight it anymore. The fight had gone. So I was like, I told the guys, I didn't even want to say anything at the time. So no one knew how much emotional pain I was in. No one had any idea. I hadn't told anyone at the time. No one had any clue.
It's hard to talk about, isn't it?
Yeah,
Like,
totally. And this is exactly, look, our intuition would usually guide us in even saying, okay, get help. But if we don't know how to listen to that, and if we don't know that, if our relationship to getting support is means equates to, oh yeah, you're weak, or you're don't know what you're doing. And even now, like only now the narratives around mental health is getting better. Even then it's still like, I wouldn't call it taboo per se. Back then it felt very taboo to talk about mental health, but now it's getting better. But even then, I don't think there's an empowered perspective. I think it's a little bit disempowering, and there's not enough structures in place to actually get people out into a really functional place and get them completely reliant on self-reference and intuition.
yeah.
So, but that's a different conversation. So I remember walking. I left the pub. I'm walking to Tottenham Court Road Station, and I could feel like the ideation was, the fantasy always was to jump in front of a train, because I was working in the city, at the time. That was the predominant one. And I remember it was a westbound Central Line train. I was standing, at the edge of the platform. I hear the train coming. It's about 7, 8 in the evening, and I could feel I was going to do it. And then all of a sudden the train comes, and I hear this voice in my head that just says, it was so loud, it was like someone shouting at me. And all it said was, Meehir, get on the fucking train and go the fuck home. And I was in that moment, like I could feel that I had alcohol in my body, but there was a level of soberness that I experienced in that moment. It was bizarre. And I was like, eh? And it snapped me out of the daze. And I got on that train. I don't remember the journey home, because it also included one bus ride. I don't remember any of that stuff. And I just remember being in my bed, lying in bed, saying, oh shit, I really was going to kill myself. But I didn't do it. And I thought I was going to have a massive panic attack and all this kind of stuff. Like, oh my God, I can't believe I almost considered it. None of that happened. There was a bit of this weird calm that settled over me. And then I woke up the next day, and it was obvious. I was like, okay, I got to stop drinking. Like this can't happen again. I had just enough agency to be, okay, we need to change some stuff. And the next 2 weeks, because I came off the booze, all the demons that I kept at bay with the drinking decided to rear their heads. I had to face the narratives of how much, hatred I had towards my upbringing, to my parents, to everyone, and just being so angry. All of that just came out. I felt like, that felt like I was going really insane, but I was able to ride it out. And then eventually it became obvious that, after drinking, it serves me to prioritize my well-being. And that's kind of where my guidance kind of took me. And I signed up at the beginning of the year with one of my best friends. We signed up to the British 10K for summer, because we wanted to focus on just being good. But he had no idea I was going through any of this. And then 2 weeks, I think it was the beginning of May, so 2 weeks after the whole train episode, he kind of reached out. Synchronicity, he said, dude, let's start training. And I was like, okay. And we started training, and it was very interesting, because the moment I shifted my focus to focusing on well-being and I was able to stand firmer in my power and conviction. Be like, look, I'm not going down that path. I'm not, I still got stuff to face, but it just doesn't serve me. And I also kind of realized that nothing happened. No external force came. I wasn't taken out. And I was like, and I was kind of sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I said to myself, I'm not going to, if it means I've stepped a foot wrong and I'm going to get destroyed for it, so be it. This is the kind of stuff I needed to kind of just do. This is where I felt I was guided to kind of go with my emotions and use my thoughts and feelings to my advantage rather than my detriment. And then I shifted this focus, completely changed the structure from drinking and self-loathing to well-being and prioritizing well-being and health. And literally within weeks, my psychology started to improve. Whatever doubt started entering my mind, I could hear the voice of my intuition just be like, nah, that's bullshit. That's bullshit. You're stronger than this. All this kind of stuff the psyche started to get stronger. The functional psychology started to get stronger. And, by the end of 2012, I was, I was in the best mental space of my life. I was in the best health, best fitness. I'd lost a ton of weight in a functional way. I didn't feel owned. I was setting my own narratives. I had this level of power that I'd never experienced before. And, I felt very empowered going into 2013, but I still had some lessons to learn. So that was one sort of hero's journey over. And another one started when it became, because I think alcohol is like it's a feminine aspect, right? And that's why they call it, no, it has, because that's why it reduces your inhibitions, right? And like a beautiful woman can disarm a man, a very sort of angry man. Alcohol has a similar type of energy. That's how I've come to identify with it. Certain schools of thought think that, and it was, and that was in that realm, right? In just using alcohol and whatever. And then the second part was actually with women in the physical. When I got into a relationship, it was the relationship I actually lost my virginity in, and that was the next part of my journey. And then I went through a couple of renditions between 2013. That relationship was intense, ended all of a sudden abruptly. I was, in bits about that, but I didn't go into full on self-loathing. I was able to kind of learn from that, and I, get my agency back, and also kind of learn just how to relate a little bit more powerfully. But I still didn't know I was giving my power away in those relationships, because I had this deep-seated need to just feel safe and, mothered essentially. And then there was a few relationships, but just before my last one, there was one there as well. And I also went back into, I did actually go retrograde, because what I'd realized is when you don't answer the call, right, you enter a state of powerlessness, right? Because either your fear or something, there's a really strong narrative that you have, a story that you have that says it's too dangerous to answer the call, so you're not going to do it, right? And if you keep that up and you keep that state of powerlessness up, it becomes a form of long-term powerlessness. And
just to clarify, that's the call of your intuition, right? The call of your heart, not
absolutely.
the call of the suicidal.
No, exactly. Yes. No, thank you for saying that. So the powerlessness was still prevalent in my psyche. It's probably one of my major core beliefs, along with like worth and trust and stuff. But powerlessness is, in my relationship to my own anger, powerlessness is where it plays out. And if you systematically deny the call and you enter a long-term state of powerlessness, that's what becomes depression, right? And I hadn't learned the structure of that, and I learned that in a relationship that I entered between 2016, just as I started my journey with natural success, right? So I entered another hero's journey, but because I was entering the unknown again, I made the choice very, very unconsciously to partner up with a dominant woman, because I was entering a part, because I'd given up alcohol at that point. So I haven't drunk in 10 years officially. Well, in January it'll be 10 years. I try it every now and then, but I don't have a full drink. But I kind of realized that I still had an addiction to having that need met around safety. And I hadn't fully stepped into my power. I didn't realize it at the time, but Mark, when I started working with Mark, it became very apparent. So I remember I entered a relationship as I started this work with natural success and actually learning about intuition as a way of experiencing agency. And because I knew I wanted to be a coach, I was like, this is one of the most powerful ways that we can actually serve people that want to work with us, get them back to, themselves and using their own inner guidance. But at the same time, I didn't realize that because it's uncharted for me. I found quite a dominant female. I ended up dating her for 2 years. But just in this case, I didn't have alcohol, and I had to kind of learn again how to build my psyche back up, because I systematically gave my power away and I didn't follow my guidance. It was overridden by my need for safety again in that relationship, and to preserve the relationship and to abdicate my power, abdicate my truth in any shape or form. And then I had to learn the hard way, and that relationship ended. And I thought I'd learned my lessons because at that time I also started to work with Mark simultaneously. I just started that journey with Mark, but it turns out I hadn't. And then I entered the relationship I was in literally not even a year later after I broke up. I was going, I left full-time work again, entering the unknown again. So structurally, I was repeating the same fucking pattern.
Yeah.
And then last time, Mark kind of like just laid the gauntlet down. He's like, dude, you better learn this or you're doomed to experience this. We repeat this for the rest of your life. And then that's kind of how I got to where I am now, about what I said at the beginning of this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if people want to reach you, how can they connect, and what can they anticipate as a way of working with you?
Woo. So if you want to reach me, you can find me on all major social media platforms. Look for my name. On Instagram, I'm Meehir Patel. You'll know who I am because I have a blue tick next to my name. But if you want to, converse with me directly, you can email me at meehir@pantheos.co.uk. Pantheos is Papa Alpha November Tango Hotel Echo Oscar Sierra.co.uk. Or you can go to createselfmastery.com, and then you can meet me and the entire team, and you can find, you can contact us there, or you can actually email me on meehir@createselfmastery.com. We actually sorted out our emails the other day. So that's how you can get in touch with me. What I will say in what to expect is I have a pretty much a no nonsense, zero BS approach. But I say this is I like to think I create an environment where that level of a directness is not something that the client can't handle. I can turn up the heat if I need to. But I also know that I have a healthy dose of softness that I can, pull out parts of somebody that they're, really afraid to bring out.
Yeah.
And also, like, I really, I love my clients. I actually tell them, I was like, look, if you're working with me, it is a big commitment in terms of the energy. One thing I do say to them is we're getting married. This is a marriage now. This is what I'm bringing to the table, and this is what I expect from you. And not everyone's ready for that, and I completely respect that. I don't judge anyone for not being there. But I pride myself on being very efficient. So if you have challenges, I get to the bottom of them. I do my best to get to the bottom of them very quickly, very efficiently. And I'm able to see things from a structural standpoint. That's kind of what I've been trained to do. So I can understand how your matrix is actually working, and then pinpointing how you're fucking yourself up, essentially. But also, because creative self-mastery is about, mastering yourself in terms of your emotional body and your thoughts and feelings, so that the creating aspect, the creative aspect becomes a lot more easier. And creating things, having a creative outlook on wanting to create things doesn't just stop at just material things. It's about how do we create ourselves as a
Yeah,
person.
100%. Yeah.
And who do we want to be, and what kind of, how actually using identity as a conscious tool for better creation, and creating everything like relationships to health, money, sex, of course, and also business, you name it. Like, if it's structural, we have a structural approach. So how you do anything is how you do everything. And and I do my best to kind of identify how you're doing something right now and why it's kind of thwarting your progress, and then how you can start doing things differently. And meanwhile, that allows us to get you very comfortable and actually depending on your inner guidance. Because if your thoughts and feelings like my fear was so prevalent and my need for safety was so prevalent, you're going to ignore the guidance that you're getting.
Mm.
So I spend a good amount of time actually doing away with the dysfunctional relationship to our emotions, our thoughts and feelings, so that the inner guidance, the intuition can actually naturally have, be the louder voice.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I work. It's how we work at CSM. So
Thank you.
thank you.
So good to hear everything that you've traveled through and journeyed through, because I imagine that there's many people, right, who are still struggling with that aspect of, hold on, the outer reality looks this way and I have to fit into that. I have to find my place in that. And part of this hero's journey is realizing that you have your own place, and it's just coming home to it. And so, yeah, thank you for sharing how you support people find that in themselves through the catalysts and the journey that you've been on.
Thank you very much, Liz. It's been